Hi! In this video, we're going to have a think about a rather controversial subject, the metronome. Now, people have very strong feelings about the metronome, one way and the other. I have many colleagues who I respect entirely who absolutely hate this thing, the metronome, which, by the way, you can get in this kind of mechanical form, or these days you can even download one onto your phone. And the really principal objections to the metronome are that they tend to be a little bit anti-musical in the view of some people. In other words, their line is that if you play something absolutely metronomically, then it's going to sound rather robotic and not terribly musical. That, of course, is true. But let me present a counter-argument to that. In many years of teaching, I've found that some people have a very natural sense of pulse that they can maintain in their playing. Maybe sometimes the pulse gets suspended because there are things that they can't play, but assuming they can basically play the piece, some people have got an internal metronome that works very well for them. Other people have to work at acquiring this internal metronome. And I've heard many performances in the exam room over the years where I've thought, well, here's somebody playing the right notes. Sometimes somebody is actually doing quite a good job on the kind of dynamic and the phrasing detail, but actually the pulse is not stable. And if you don't have a stable pulse, then the piece will lose its cohesion. So it's a kind of fundamental requirement for a successful performance. So I'm not advocating for one moment that we want a rigid pulse going all the way through the piece. But what I am advocating is that if we have a steady pulse that we actually can internalize, then we can be flexible with it. So that's my case for using a metronome. I've used it a lot over the years in teaching, and it does tend to work. And I'll admit to using it in my own playing, because even though I think I've got a reasonable internalized metronome after all these years, there are times when I'm practicing when I think, actually, I think the pulse is just pulling away there, and I'll just put the metronome on to double check it. Sometimes, actually, the pulse isn't pulling away, but the fact that I've checked it is revealing something to me about maybe just feeling a little bit vulnerable about that particular passage. Maybe it's slightly awkward to play. But sometimes when we get anxious about something, the pulse actually rushes. That, of course, is going to make it even more dangerous. And I know that happens to me sometimes in really difficult, fast-moving passages. There's just a tendency to take off. So if you get the metronome on it, you can stabilize it, and actually things become much safer. There is also, of course, the danger that things just get slower, often because we're not quite sure what the next note is or the next chord is, so we kind of lose time with the pulse. So using the metronome as a way of making sure you know what the pulse is and where you are with the stability of the pulse in the whole piece, and then being able to switch the metronome off and then adding in your rhythmic flexibility, I don't think is a difficult thing to do. And I think the end result is actually pretty good. And for those who are not quite sure what the metronome is telling us, you'll see in a metronome that you've always got a number. And that number is telling us how many beats there are in a minute. So if at the beginning of a piece of music you sometimes see a marking, for example, that says crotchet equals 60, that means that the metronome is going to tick 60 times in a minute. So you can work out that actually that means that the speed of a beat is the speed of a second. So if you're trying to gauge the speed of something from a metronome mark, well, the metronome will tell you. If you haven't got access to a metronome for some reason, you can always gauge it from that 60, because if 60 is kind of 1 beat per second, 120 will be 2 beats per second. You can kind of work things out from there. And when a composer or an editor puts a metronome marking at the beginning of the piece, it comes to some people as quite a surprise. You know, people are happily playing through their piece thinking they've got it cracked, and then they put the metronome on and suddenly realise it should be going quite a lot faster, or sometimes quite a lot slower. And only then do you start to discover the character of the music as the composer intended, or as the editor perceives it should go. You can always be flexible with a metronome marking. I don't think anybody should feel that if it says crotchet equals 88. We have to play it at exactly that speed. If you want to play it slightly faster or slightly slower, that's absolutely fine. But my main purpose for talking about the metronome is just to encourage people to make sure that this underlying pulse is secure in our playing, so that we can then do everything that we want to do to be flexible and expressive with the pulse, but we've always got a consistent reference point. So if you've had many a happy hour with a metronome, continue to enjoy it. It does have the potential to drive you insane after a while, so you may just want to do limited time with the metronome in order to keep your sanity. And if you've not really ever engaged with a metronome, well, here's an encouragement to give it a go and see if in fact it does help you. Good luck.